Well, hey everyone, thank you so much for purchasing How to Get Into the New York Times. I know that that is a big goal for a lot of people, and it seems a little out there sometimes. I know that I definitely didn't think it was a possibility for me until it actually happened, but you've got to have the courage to try in order to make it happen. So I'm here to make that process a little easier for you today. I hope you find this helpful. So with that, let's get into it. Okay, you know what? I want you guys be able to see me. Hello. Okay. So you want to get into the New York Times. It may seem like a pipe dream, but it's not. It may seem like you're shooting too high, but it's totally possible. Why? Well, I have a few reasons for you. So listen up. Reason number one, the New York Times wants great stories and great writers, and they don't care who you are. They don't care what your past is. They don't care how many bylines you have. They care about what you have to say and what you have to bring to their readers. Reason number two, editors have no bias against unpublished writers or those with little experience. That's right. Now, it's not easy to get into the New York Times, but the truth is that there are no major barriers to anyone. You don't have to have a degree. You don't have to have a certain job. You don't have to have anything but a great pitch, a good idea, and some solid writing skills. And honestly, you guys, the writing skills part is important, but it's not the most important thing. You don't have to be the next great American novelist to be able to get a piece published in the New York Times. Number three, there are a ton of great and varied sections you can choose from. Now, we're going to talk about some of those later, but most of the time when people think of the New York Times, they're thinking those front page breaking news stories. They're thinking the opinion, pages with just tons of breaking hot trending political opinions. Sure, that is one part of the New York Times that you could try to get into. Not necessarily the easiest sections though, and certainly not the only sections. So stay with me and I'm going to tell you where your best chances may be for getting published. Number four, there are dozens of editors that you can try. So you don't always have to pitch the same one. That's the great thing. It's like you could pitch honestly 3 different editors at the same time and they wouldn't know. They're in different sections. They're not all talking all the time. Now you wouldn't want to pitch 2 editors in the same section at the same time. However, there are so many possibilities to jump around and try and get your rejections and try again. But people just aren't really aware of all the many sections and the many editors that are available for pitching at the New York Times. So first of all, let's put on our confidence. It takes a lot to be able to say, I have what it takes to pitch this like world-renowned newspaper, maybe the best known newspaper in the entire world that's been around forever. Imagine what it would feel like to have your name and a byline there. That feels a little crazy. It feels a little out there. And I know people are always very hesitant to aim high, especially when they're first getting started. But there's nothing wrong with aiming high, and aiming high means that you might actually land high. So say it with me. I'm a writer and I can get published in the New York Times. Did you say it? Okay, now I want you to stick with me. I want you to get your head there, envision yourself doing it, and believe that you can learn the process for pitching and you can articulate your story ideas in a way that will ultimately get a yes, even if it takes a few rejections first. So why are you listening to me? Well, if I don't know you, hello, my name is Erica Anderson. I've been freelance writing for about 4 years or more, writing professionally forever. It feels like I do have a degree in journalism. I don't think that necessarily makes me a better writer. Maybe it gives me a little extra points for teaching. And I also have a teaching degree, but I've never used it. Anyway, I never thought it was possible to get into the New York Times by myself, but lo and behold, I have done it 3 times now. Now, that is not just a fluke. That is knowing that there is a process and a certain way of pitching a story that can actually get picked up. And so because I've done it 3 times and I'm working on a 4th time, I want you to know how that works. So here we go. All right, so now my tries at getting published there were not without rejections, nor will yours be likely. Rejections are part of the freelance life. Rejections are part of learning. Rejections are part of getting better and building and just all the things. It's hard, but it's important for the process. So I believe, though, because I've done it 3 times and I've been rejected more than accepted, I do believe you can do it too. So where do we begin? Where do we begin with this process of getting your byline in the New York Times? Okay, step 1, start reading the New York Times. This may be no duh piece of advice, but it's true. Skip past the front page, boring breaking news, and get to the good stuff. Yes, opinion, but arts, lifestyle, fashion, food, travel, all of that. Just start intaking what it is that they're putting out there, and you'll start to see the wide variety of stuff that's available for you, the topics that you can pitch. So next up, if you think it's easy that sometimes the newspaper is just full of it's easy to think that sometimes the newspaper is just full of hot news items of the day, bad news from abroad, or economic challenges for the country. And if those are the things you want to write about, that's great. And I'm sure you can come up with some unique and different ideas for those things. But remember that a lot of those really more broad and basic and everyday things are being covered by New York Times reporters. And so you've got to break into a space where their staff is not doing it. Next up, familiarize yourself with the various sections. So, I mean, do a broad overview and then start to notice, like, what stories are you personally drawn to? What is it that gets your attention? Because I guarantee you what's going to happen is you're going to think, I could have written that, or, oh my gosh, I have something similar to that, or there's an angle that I can think of related to a different subject that would be similar to this. And it just gets your gears going in terms of the ideas that you can develop. So pick a story or 2 every day and read it. Read all of it, not just skimming it. This is going to integrate how they, the kind of things that they publish and how they write and what they want, and the kind of the angles and the passions and all of that. That's going to get integrated into your brain so that you're more organically going to think like a person who writes for the New York Times because you've been reading their work. So check some of the authors. There's a lot of freelancers in the Times. You can go and follow their author handles. A lot of times their Twitter handles are in the bylines. And I have done this. I have, this is an interesting story. Who wrote this? Click their Twitter bio or click their Twitter handle. I go find them on Twitter, or I go look up their past articles. You can look up authors' past articles in Muck Rack. Muck Rack is a website that kind of compiles all the work of journalists and writers and kind of see where else has this person been published, or what else have they written about? And that can generate ideas for you. You can go to their websites. You can see what kind of books they've written. Following the kind of breadcrumbs of the people that have already been published there can help you sort of begin to brainstorm and envision that for yourself. All right. So make notes. Notes are great. You'll forget things. So write it down, make notes of interesting story ideas, headlines. Headlines are a great thing to research because that helps you kind of see what is the gist of what editors are looking for. Because if you can sum it up in a great headline, that's going to be good news for you. So there are things that you never thought you would see in the New York Times. These are literally just headlines that I found Googling, sitting down just the other day. And so just so you know, here are some of the things. So putting a human face on the Waco disaster. For once, Donald Trump did not enjoy the show. A beauty treatment promised to zap fat. For some, it brought disfigurement. What to do if a friend ghosts you. These devices save lives, but almost no one has them at home. Married during the indictment. The thrill of the office crush. So you can see this goes for everything from the Waco disaster to Donald Trump to having a crush in your office, or what to do if a friend ghosts you. Just goes to show you that some of the ideas that you have might not be so far-fetched, right? It doesn't always have to be the most serious thing. It doesn't always have to be the thing that everyone is already writing about. You can find the one sliver of the trend or whatever it is that's on your mind and turn it into something that's different and interesting and worth a read. Okay, moving on. More examples. I just love these examples because they just help you see how much opportunity there is. So it's a toddler's birthday party. How about a $75,000 budget? When TikTok says you're autistic, My transplanted heart and I will die soon. That was a personal essay. That was, I read it really hard to read. The guilt of putting down your pet. How wild turkeys find love. Have eggs, will travel to freeze them. Smaller, versatile concert halls step out of the shadow of stadiums. So you can see here, there is so many different topics and categories that you could play into. So step 2 to getting published in the New York Times, step 2 is brainstorming. And if you've been through my Brainstorm to Brilliant masterclass, you know that brainstorming is such an important part of everything for me, the foundation of all strategy. And so once you have read through some of the titles I gave you and done your own research in the New York Times, pick up some of your favorite stories and start brainstorming some of your own spins on the same subjects. So this doesn't necessarily mean, oh, these are the things you're going to pitch, but what it does is it helps your brain. It's sort of exercising your brain to work in the way that you want it to work when you actually have that pitch that you want to pitch. So imagine how your unique angle or perspective could offer something new or different. You can just pick things that are already published and then imagine how you could shift that just a little bit to be something that would be different or interesting. These sorts of brain exercises are really important for getting us ready to be in that spot when the right idea comes. So here is an example. I just did this the other day. My example, I saw this piece and the headline was, "Why I Watch the Closing Credits of Every Movie I See." Well, I couldn't relate to that because I don't, but I was intrigued by the subject matter and the way it was approached. And I immediately thought of how I'm always reading every piece of a book I'm reading. So I'm like reading the thank yous, I'm reading the intros, the prologues and stuff like that. And so I read that original piece and then I crafted my own pitch, except my piece was about appreciating every piece of a book. And I had never emailed this editor before. It was totally cold. And I spent about an hour on the pitch and I sent it off. And I received an email back in 2 hours, which is like, even that is just like, oh my gosh, they responded, right? And the editor liked the idea, but he asked if I could shift my focus to a bit more of a non-narrative aspect. So things like the copyright, the prefaces, the title pages, table of contents, because that's really different. Like, what would make it interesting to read about that? And he said, if you want to retool the pitch, send it back. That would be cool. Well, I was stoked to get an email back with a suggestion. I spent another hour redoing the pitch. Of course, by then I was totally overthinking it, but I sent it off to see what would happen. And he liked round 2 and I'm working on that piece now. So another example, here's a piece. This is sort of like, stick with me here. This is like an exercise that we're going to do right now to just sort of help you see what I mean. So the piece headline was "Want to Lead a Better Life? The Secret is in the Cemetery." So after reading this piece, here are a few things that I noted that made it different. It's an unexpected shift in thinking, something that you're kind of going like, wait a second, what? That doesn't make sense. But like you're curious, you want to know more, right? It's an odd place to recommend hanging out, a graveyard. So that's intriguing. That's interesting. That's curious. There's an interesting character in the story. Whew, I just let my dog out. And there's fascinating tidbits. Like if you read this article, there's a place where it says, on the gravestone read, "The man died suddenly by falling from a carriage." And so these little interesting details that go in that give it character and life. And then there's this universal connection when you're talking about anything related to death. And inside the piece, they talk about family recipes, love stories, death, all of these things. So they found the author found a way to make this connect to the human experience in a larger way. So that's one example. Now, what's something else we could approach in a similar way? So what's like an odd place to hang out? So this is an example from my own life right now. Odd place to hang out, a street dancing studio. That's where my son's been taking breakdancing lessons, right? So that is a new environment for me. It was a place I have never been. And I had an unexpected shift in thinking since I started going there. Like I didn't even know, I always wondered, how do people become street dancers? Like, how do you learn this stuff, right? I thought street dancing was for city people who danced in New York City. Like I had no idea. But when I heard about this studio, my son started breakdancing classes, I realized that it actually draws in a really diverse crowd and is sort of like almost like a cultural melting pot. And inside the studio, there's all races, all classes, all ages, all different kinds of people. And this has been a really cool environment for me and for my son to experience. And so I'm thinking about how could I write something about this interesting and unique sort of experience that I've had as a mom. So here are a few of the things that came up as I was brainstorming this. Interesting character. So the person who owns the studio, his name is Soul. That's actually his nickname, but that's all I know him as. He started the only street dancing studio in Indiana. So that's interesting in and of itself. And he keeps his prices low. So there are not a lot of barriers for low income kids. I mean, that also was very intriguing to me. There's a couple of fascinating tidbits. I love that everyone has a b-boy name. So once the boys, it's almost all boys. Once the boys have been dancing for a while, Soul actually creates a b-boy name for them. So there, some of the names I've heard this week: Flipside, Explode, Ricochet, Crash. And I love it. And they sort of really thrive on this like other identity where they're, you know, they become this dancer person. And I love the thought behind that. And then there's this universal connection. Dance is a universal language. It bridges divides. Everybody wants that. It's fun. It's a new experience. You really can't be unhappy when you're dancing. And so I'm taking all of these things into consideration and figuring out how can I write an interesting piece about this, about how maybe how breakdancing bridges divides, or, you know, what does that say about the human experience? All right, so let's move on. Oh, this thing skipped back. Let me go back to my screen wherever I was. I apologize. This happens often with this presentation. Okay, did I? Okay, here's where we were. And now we're moving on to step 3, finding the editor. So once you think you've got like a decent story idea, or you may have done this first, it doesn't matter. You got to find the editor. You got to find the editor. So once you've decided on a section or an idea or two, you need to figure out who edits that section. And I'm going to give you the names of the ones I know here. I will put that in a document that you'll get as part of this class. But these often, the editors, you have to know, they often change and there can be more than one. So just don't rely on what I'm offering you here. Like, you know, an editor can switch jobs or move to a different department. And so this is a good foundational starting point, but you know, it could change from the time I create this video, in which case I'm going to tell you how you find these people on your own. So yes, note, editors of the New York Times do get a lot of pitches, but they want them. Why? Because they are searching through all the stuff to find the good ones. They get a lot of bad pitches. They get a lot of pitches from people who haven't taken a class like this and don't know what they're looking for and don't know how to write a pitch. And so you are going to stand out, and I don't want that to stop you from sending a pitch. So here are some of the different sections with individual editors, but there are more than this. But letters of recommendation, modern love, travel, eat, art, religion, family, love. Those are some of the more obvious ones. And here's one thing that I really want to offer you right now, and that is a pro tip to follow these editors on Twitter. Follow them and see what kind of vibe they have. You'll get some major insight by doing this, and editors love Twitter. There's just something about Twitter that editors and writers love. And I don't know if it's just like keeping up with the news and each other or whatever, but Twitter is the place to be. And I actually have a Twitter for Writers masterclass if you're interested in learning more about that. So I get it. Editors can be scary. It's vulnerable to put yourself out there, especially at a big place like the New York Times, but they get hundreds of emails and they aren't judging you. They won't even remember you if they don't like it. So you can always pitch again. So just do it. So I like to think of the editor situation as like when I was dating in my 20s, I decided to stop making every date a big deal. I was like, I'm just going to meet people and have fun. And I ended up going on dozens of dates, and most of them weren't great, but I just saw it as getting to know new people. And that is how you kind of need to think about pitching, not just the New York Times, but wherever, because it's not always going to work out. It's not always going to be a great fit, but every time you do it, you learn something new, either from the editor about how you're pitching or whatever. And so please just try not to take it so seriously and do a lot of it. Let's see. Oh, well, I kind of said this, but look at it as getting to know the industry. gaining insight and learning. And editor replies especially can give you a lot of great info and fodder for the future. So given that the New York Times has so many sections and editors, you can even pitch 2 to 3 different stories to different editors at the same time. And I spoke with an editor, not from the New York Times, but a different editor, but I think this is interesting to mention. And she said it is okay with her to send more than one idea. So if you have 2 or 3, maybe you send 2 or 3 potential ideas within one email. And that maybe gives them a little bit more ability to say yes to you or to consider your ideas. Now, I can't say that every editor loves that, but I've heard from a few that that's something that they don't mind, and that could give you a better shot. So how did I get into the New York Times? Well, let's talk about it. So yeah, you're wondering, how did I do it? There I am. I'm here, I'm there. It was always a dream, but I didn't know where to begin. And this was way before I realized you could find an editor's email and throw them a line. So a friend of mine had written for the New York Times and was willing to connect me with an editor there. Now that was cool, but I was still a stranger. I didn't know this guy at all. He didn't know me, and I had to pitch this guy. So basically like a cold pitch for the most part. And here's the thing, friendship connections actually don't mean much in the big world of publishing in a place like the New York Times, because it has to be good. You have to have a quality idea and a quality story and be a good writer in order for you to get the yes. I mean, this is the New York Times. So when the intro was made, I didn't even have an idea, to be honest. I got this intro and I was like, oh my gosh, I have to come up with something right away because I have his ear. And so I scoured the headlines and I spent hours trying to come up with something unique and interesting that would make sense to publish in the opinion section. And when I landed on an idea, I spent forever tooling with the pitch. A whole weekend. I was like, this has to be perfect. I was totally overthinking it, but I sent it on. I waited with bated breath, and the response was, I think this will work. It's just so casual, right? So what? Especially for op-eds and new writers, this is the thing though. You have to actually write it first. A lot of times, especially for the op-ed section. And then the editorial team has to go over it and say yes to it as well, not just the one editor. I don't know if that's how it works for all sections, but this is how it worked for my section. And so I spent a lot of time writing this op-ed, finally turned it in, waited, and I got a yes. And it was very, very exciting. So when the jury was in and they said yes, the next week I saw my first byline in the New York Times, and it was very thrilling. Of course, the first thing you think when you get something like that is like, how could I ever do that again? So I didn't think I could do it again, but lo and behold, I did. So that's the truth about these things, right? Though it always feels impossible until you actually do it. And that's just, I mean, that's still how I feel about so many things. After having written 2 books and been published a million places, I still feel like it's impossible sometimes, but it's a matter of, it's mind over matter. And part of this is a mental game. It's a think yourself into confidence game. And that's part of it. So I soon pitched another idea and it was rejected. Okay. And I pitched twice more with more rejections, but ultimately they picked up my third pitch and I had another one the next year. And so keep trying. You can't give up is the moral of the story here. So, oh yeah, like I said, so I pitched 3 times, got rejections. Sometimes I actually wrote out the entire piece first and they were rejected. But then I landed my third piece in the New York Times ultimately, and I'm working on number 4. So each of these pieces have been like, it's basically been 1 a year. So I would say I'm trying like 4 times a year. I'm getting on average 1 a year, and I'm perfectly happy with that. I don't expect to get them all. That would be crazy. But just to give you an idea of the process and how it works for me. So just know that, and I've said it before, rejection is going to happen. There are a million reasons for it, but don't let it get you down. Here's the thing. Those pieces and pitches that were rejected, I was able to use them at other outlets because they were good. I mean, I had spent a lot of time on them, and just because they didn't work for the New York Times, that doesn't mean they don't work elsewhere. So I like to say that no writing is ever wasted. I have almost always been able to repitch my stories or pitches to another publication and ultimately get them published. Not every time. There have been a few that I have not. And that is sort of part of you got to accept that part of the game. But please know that it doesn't mean that it can't be used just because they say no in the end. There's always another option. So what should you do now? You're all revved up and ready to go. So what should you do now? Okay, here's what I'm going to say. As a recap, let's go over your steps. Number one, grab a copy of the paper or go to the website. Just pay the online fee that you need to look at the stories. It's totally worth it to get your insight. Find the sections that pique your interest and deep dive them. Just like mark them down, check them off, and pick a few sections to read every day. Like I wouldn't get in a rush about this. I mean, you can do it right away. But I would just kind of get yourself kind of soaking in the New York Times stuff for a few days before you even try to pitch, because that will help you as you're generating ideas. Also, don't forget that you can search keywords and find articles on topics about what you specifically like to write about. Like I write a lot about faith, church, things like that. So I will search that, some of those phrases, to find what other people have written, how long ago it was, because if it was a really long time ago, there's no reason you can't write about a topic again. And so please use the search bar generously. Next up, don't overthink your idea. I know I said take a few days, but do that to just sort of soak it up. But once you get an idea, don't overthink it. Like if someone wrote an article in 2008, that was so long ago, nobody's going to remember that. And different principles apply now. Like the world is a different place now. And so your perspective on a particular issue isn't going to be the same one that was written in 2008. There's so much fresh perspective since then. So brainstorm ideas and angles. Make sure you have evidence to support what you're saying. It can't just be like a I feel type of thing. It's got to be like, here's an example, here's some evidence. Like make sure you can back up your idea, and then write your pitch in a document, edit it, perfect it, and send it on. That's all you got to do. Find the editor, send it off. And don't forget, you really need a good subject line. So I will, I'm gonna drop a New York Times pitch in the classroom course here so that you can see how I have done it. But that is basically what I have for you in terms of how to get published in the New York Times. I hope this has been helpful. I hope my documents will help you. My signature course, Bragworthy Bylines Get Paid and Published in 6 Weeks, is like this on steroids. We go into so many more details about not just how to get published in the New York Times, but also how to get published a lot of different places and, start making money as a freelance writer and all of that. So if you were interested in that course, stand by. I live launch that every 3 or 4 months or so. And so I would love to have you on. So shoot me an email. Let me know if you want to get on the wait list or if you want to see if we're in launch mode, and we're going to be starting soon, depending on when you watch this. So listen up. Listen to me. Are you listening? You can do this. Don't give up. I'm rooting for you. You got this. You got this. All right. If you have any questions, let me know. And thank you so much for being here. And I will see you around.